now the BBC News on BBC One with Michelle Hussein.
On the eve of a crucial Eurozone summit, Greece says it has new proposals aimed at breaking the deadlock over its debt. The Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras is on his way to Brussels as Greece faces a repayment of more than £1 billion in the next 10 days. In Athens tonight, thousands of protesters urge him to stand firm against demands for further spending cuts. We'll be live in Athens and in Brussels to ask whether Greece's proposals will be enough to satisfy its creditors. Also tonight, anti-terrorism officers are accused of playing a role in radicalising 3 Bradford women by encouraging them to contact their brother in Syria. The American church where 9 people were shot dead reopens with a special service of remembrance. And Andy Murray proves he's the King of Queens, winning the precursor to Wimbledon for a 4th time. Good evening. Greece's leaders are heading for Brussels tonight with new proposals aimed at breaking the deadlock over the country's debt crisis. On the eve of an emergency Eurozone summit, anti-austerity protesters have gathered again in Athens, insisting that their government should not agree to further spending cuts. In the next 10 days, Greece is due to pay the International Monetary Fund more than £1 billion. A default is raising fears of a Greek exit from the euro. From Athens, James Reynolds reports.
Tonight, the Greek Prime Minister begins a journey which may decide whether or not his country stays in the euro. Alexis Tsipras, the leader who promises no major cuts, is now taking new proposals to tomorrow's emergency summit.
What, you expect a press conference while I'm driving? No.
His finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, takes shelter behind a motorbike helmet. Thousands of left-wing protesters tonight gathered outside Parliament to tell their leaders not to break their promises.
Why are you here?
Because I want to protest against the measures of austerity.
If there's no change, Greece gets no deal.
Of course, yes. But I think that...
Are you prepared for that?
I don't think that anyone is prepared for this, but at these positions we don't have another choice to make. That's what I believe.
These protesters still want the government to hold its ground, but refusing to give way won't get this country the deal that it needs. We don't yet know what the government's new proposals may contain, nor how much it may now be prepared to give up.
The congregation of St Catherine's Church in Athens awaits the government's decisions. Many of the worshippers at this morning's service are retired. They rely on pensions that the government has promised to protect.
It's very difficult because my pension has already been halved. The previous government cut all the additional benefits. I manage with help from my sons who are abroad.
The Papathanasiou family has just come from church. They manage to eat out once a month. 27-year-old Mikalis spent 2 years looking for a job. The family wants the government to compromise.
I want them to agree, because, in my opinion, Greece without the euro is nothing. We are part of Europe, and Europe means strength.
Demonstrators believe that Greece can find a way to get by without giving in. This country has already managed to stretch its last minute to half a decade. But real deadlines and real choices are now closing in. James Reynolds, BBC News, Athens.
Well, tonight our Europe editor Katia Adler is in Brussels and our economics editor Robert Peston is in Athens. Katia, the Greek government says it's coming to Brussels with new proposals. What kind of a reception can it expect?
Well, there was a really interesting insight the other day, Michelle, into the minds of those who've been negotiating with Greek officials when the frustrated IMF chief, Christine Lagarde, said these talks need adults in the room. Well, tomorrow the adults arrive in force, all 19 leaders of the Eurozone. There is a real sense of urgency now here, not just from the Greek government, but the French President François Hollande said today everything must be done to keep Greece in the Eurozone. He summed up the mood here in Brussels, but not quite the facts. Because while everyone wants a deal, even if it's a messy and a short-term one, they do not want a deal at any price. Those countries that have already been through austerity pain, like Spain and Ireland, they can't afford to have Greece bend all the rules because their voters would never forgive them. The Greeks like to appeal directly to the most powerful Eurozone leader, Angela Merkel, but she's also under a lot of domestic pressure from her taxpayers who say they don't want to prop up Greece anymore, and from her normally loyal party as well. So if there is to be a deal with Greece in the coming days before it runs out of cash completely, it'll have to be one without too much obvious compromise.
Robert, on that point about what price any deal might come at, what is your sense of how great the gap is tonight between the Greek government and the creditors?
Well, this is a very anxious city, Michelle, and the main cause of that anxiety is the weakness of Greek banks. As you'll be aware, about 5 billion euros withdrawn by worried depositors and savers from Greek banks just in the last week. 30 billion this year, and Greek banks are only alive because the European Central Bank has put them on life support. Now, under its rules, the European Central Bank cannot maintain that life support if there is no realistic prospect of a deal, and that's why these talks tomorrow are so important. Right now, the people I talk to, officials and regulators across Europe, are gloomy, although they are aware that Alexis Tsipras, the Greek Prime Minister, thinks these come with reasonable concessions. They are not clear that he is offering enough in the way of welfare cuts and tax rises to satisfy the constituencies that Katja was talking about, the Irish, for example, and the Spanish, all of whom are insistent that Greece should not be let off lightly. So tonight, as I say, a very anxious city. If the talks go nowhere tomorrow, there's a genuine risk that Greek banks will be put under special measures, that there will be restrictions put on the capital that Greeks can withdraw from those banks, and in many ways that would represent a powerful symbolic move towards exit from the euro, because that would be a breach of one of the euro's principal rules.
Robert Peston in Athens and Katja Adler in Brussels, thank you both. And later in the programme, Katja will be reporting from Spain on how David Cameron's demands for EU reform are likely to be received. The husbands of two of the three sisters who travelled to Syria from Bradford have criticised the police, alleging that they played a role in radicalising them. They say police actively encouraged the women to contact their brother, who's believed to have joined Islamic State, without considering the consequences. Danny Savage's report contains some flash photography.
I miss you. I love you.
It's nearly a week since the husbands of two of the Dawood sisters pleaded for their wives and children to come home. Now these men are blaming the police for the situation they find themselves in. They claim counter-terrorism officers actively encouraged the sisters to keep in contact with this man, their younger brother Ahmed. He is believed to be fighting in Syria. In a solicitor's letter to senior politicians, the husbands claim there has been a reckless disregard as to the consequences of any such contact. They say by allowing the sisters to talk to their brother once he left for Syria, police have been complicit in the grooming and radicalising of the women.
The letter also reveals that Zora Dawood, whose family live here, left a message for her relatives on voicemail after the husband's appeal, saying the reason they'd all gone to Syria was because of the oppressive nature of police surveillance.
But one expert believes that getting this family to leave Britain for Syria was down to a number of reasons.
Radicalization, by definition, is multifaceted, is multidimensional, is extremely complex. And for that reason, there are a combination of factors which potentially can influence somebody's decision.
In response, counter-terrorism police say they are doing everything they can to find these children and their mothers. And officers completely reject any suggestion that they helped radicalise or groom the adults involved. Danny Savage, BBC News, Bradford.
The South Carolina church where 9 African Americans were shot dead 4 days ago held a service today for the first time since the attack. As the congregation remembered those killed as they attended a Bible study class, hundreds of other people gathered outside. Let's join our correspondent Aleem Maqbool, who's there now. Aleem.
Yes, well, it was an incredibly moving day in Charleston. As you can imagine, bells rang out from churches across this city in remembrance of the 9 people who were killed in this church behind me. As for the service itself, it was not about big-name speakers as perhaps some expected. It was really focused on the community and on trying to heal. An historic sanctuary, reopened for the first time since the horrors of the attack within its walls. Hundreds gathered in memory of the 6 women and 3 men who had worshipped here but also lost their lives here. A black cloth covered the chair where Pastor Clementa Pinckney would have sat.
And now it's a time for us to focus on the 9 families. We need to be in solidarity and praying for families and our communities around this state and particularly in Charleston.
And people who've heard the calls for solidarity came from around the area to join in mourning.
I just wanted to stay here so that when the doors open that they could see, like that the congregation could see that that we're for them and that we're here for them.
We want to move forward as a community. That one small evil is not going to let our whole community down.
That determination to overcome the hatred of a gunman apparently motivated by racism was very much on display here. Well, the response to this tragedy has really been led by the extraordinary courage and dignity shown by the families of the victims. They've even said they forgive the man who killed their loved ones. But that's not to say they don't still want answers and want things to change. Reverend Waltrina Middleton lost her cousin to pain in the attack.
We are fighting for our freedom.
Last night she addressed a protest rally here.
Until we have dedicated dialogue around race and racism in this country, we have a long way to go.
Today has been about providing comfort, but the days ahead will need more soul-searching, not just here, but across this country. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News in Charleston.
Parents of newborn babies in England and Scotland will be able to have them vaccinated against meningitis B from September. The programme, which is the first of its kind in the world, had been delayed because of negotiations over the cost. Campaigners have welcomed the news, saying that it'll save thousands of lives. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson reports.
Ready, steady, catch!
Tommy, like most 3-year-olds, is full of energy, but he will always live with the scars of meningitis. He was just 5 months old when he got the infection and lost 3 limbs.
You cheated, you got a pen, yeah?
His mother said the morning she took him to the GP was when the nightmare began.
Just looked at Tommy in my daughter's hand, he just says, get an ambulance. And there was people running everywhere and I just slid down the floor. And he's looked at me, he got me in the room to talk to Tommy where they was injecting him and he had oxygen on and everything, and the doctor just says to me straight away, Julie's got meningitis.
I got your best friend to be waiting all day.
Julie Tuckley has campaigned for children to be immunised against meningitis B with a new vaccine. She's delighted the NHS will introduce it for babies like her new daughter Georgie from September.
All infants will be offered it at 2 months, a second dose at 4 months and a third dose at 12 months.
Meningitis B is a bacterial infection that particularly affects children under the age of 5. It can cause severe brain damage and blood poisoning, and it kills 1 in 10 infected babies. But this new vaccine will protect against 88% of the different meningitis B strains circulating in the UK. The new vaccine was approved for use in Europe in 2013, and charities have criticised the 2-year delay in bringing it in.
The sad fact is that,
lives have been lost needlessly because of the delay in the negotiations on the price of the vaccine. But now we've crossed that line and lives will be saved.
The protection for babies is accompanied by a vaccine for teenagers for meningitis W. It's a rare but another dangerous form of the infection, and 17 to 18-year-olds will be offered a jab from August. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
Tomorrow's Eurozone summit on Greece will be followed later this week by another significant EU gathering, talks in Brussels, where David Cameron will for the first time lay out his demands for reform to 27 other member states. The meeting's expected to set the tone for negotiations ahead of Britain's in-out referendum. Our Europe editor Katya Adler has been exploring how the Prime Minister's proposals are likely to be received. Here's what she discovered in Spain.
So many of us holiday in Spain. We feel we know the country, the music, the food. But what about the politics?
Spain is a bit of a wild card. It's in the midst of a political upheaval. Traditional parties may not be in power here next year, and that could affect David Cameron's chances for reform. All EU governments have to be on board for treaty change, and here in Spain, the Prime Minister just doesn't know who he'll be dealing with.
The current centre-right government regards Britain as a friend. It's on board for making the EU more competitive, but is against treaty change and discriminating against workers from other EU countries.
I would be very careful on saying this requires a treaty change. And it takes you unanimous vote in 28 parliaments. What happens if it fails somewhere? I think this is very risky. There are certain values, certain principles we all share. Well, we cannot touch them. We shouldn't touch them, and we're not going to do it.
Up-and-coming populist parties here disagree with almost all David Cameron's proposals. They want radical change in Spain and the EU.
Now it's time to change, and people who can vote is demanding that change.
David Cameron. But David Cameron wants change.
But we want a different EU, one representing the people, not serving the interests of banks and big business. The British government is asking for change that further favours financial markets. At the moment in the EU, those who have power get to dictate to those who don't.
Here in southern Spain, there's around 1 million people feeling powerless and very angry. They are Brits who live in Spain. The UK isn't allowing long-term expats to take part in the EU referendum. But if there's a no vote, these people will lose their rights to live here as EU citizens.
There's a lot of Brits on the costas, right up the costas, where they cannot have a vote on their future. Why is that?
If it comes that they do a referendum of what happens, my son was 4 months old when he came. He's 32 now. What does he do? If then he has to leave here because he's not legal to work here.
A lot of people in England think people come over here, have a season and then go back. But this is our home, this is where we belong, this is where we've made our families here. And it's not right that we cannot have a vote on it.
So many opinions in only one country. But domestic politics in all EU nations counts. It affects government's ability for reform and willingness to listen to a British Prime Minister. Katya Adler, BBC News, Spain.
And now the sport. Let's join Ore Oduba at the BBC Sports Centre. Hello, Ore.
Michelle, thank you. Andy Murray has won a record equalling 4th title at Queen's. This year's, though, was a little more unusual as he had to overcome not one but 2 opponents in a day. Here's David Ornstein.
Home soil is supposed to provide home advantage. For Andy Murray, Saturday's rain made it more of a hindrance. It meant he'd need to work a double shift today. His response? Emphatic. This, the first game after the resumption of Murray's semi-final against Viktor Troicki. There'd be no looking back. He dominated the opening set, and though the second required a tie-break, Murray was too good for an opponent he's now beaten in each of their 7 meetings. That left the British number 1 with 2 hours to prepare a plan to put his name on the trophy again. It was never likely to be a stroll against South Africa's Kevin Anderson, 6'8" and with an equally imposing serve. And the hindrances just kept on coming, this time not the weather, but another form of nature. Nothing would derail Murray though. He broke in style to take control of the first set, and despite Anderson delivering his 100th ace of the tournament, Murray mixed the sublime with the ridiculous.
6'8", and he's making him feel like he's about 5'2".
To triumph with an outstanding performance.
It's extremely difficult to win these events, and everyone is improving all of the time, playing against some of the greatest players that have ever played, so you need to keep working hard, trying to get better.
For Andy Murray, that's a 4th Queen's title, and with Wimbledon just a week away, he's in ominous form. Interestingly, the last time he won here, in 2013, he went on to win Wimbledon. David Ornstein, BBC News, West London.
Lewis Hamilton is now just 10 points clear in the Formula One World Championship after Nico Rosberg cruised to victory at the Austrian Grand Prix. Hamilton started the race on pole, but his time at the front was short-lived, as Nick Parrott reports.
Nico Rosberg could barely contain his delight in victory at the Red Bull Ring. After missing out on pole position, the smart money would have been on Lewis Hamilton to win. But his advantage in starting from pole lasted all of 9 seconds.
Rosberg's won the start into turn 1.
And from there cruised to the checkered flag. Hamilton wasn't the only one caught by surprise on the opening lap. All of a sudden, Kimi Raikkonen found the McLaren of Fernando Alonso on top of his Ferrari. Fortunately, only their pride was hurt. Any hope of a fight back from Hamilton evaporated after he changed tyres. Crossing this white line as he returned to the track saw him given a 5-second penalty. And he wasn't the only one who messed up, as Ferrari cost Sebastian Vettel 3rd place during his pit stop. Victory saw Rosberg cut Hamilton's championship lead to 10 points.
He's beaten Hamilton once again in Europe this season.
But he can expect a much tougher race at Silverstone in a fortnight. Nick Parrott, BBC News.
England's under-21s have taken a huge step towards the knockout stage of the European Championships with a 1-0 win over Sweden. Defeats would have eliminated Gareth Southgate's side, but a late volley from Manchester United forward Jesse Lingard secured the win. Their final group game is against Italy on Wednesday. And some superb performances on the final day helped Great Britain finish top of the medal table at the Rowing World Cup in Italy. Helen Glover and Heather Stanning took one of 4 goals today. The Olympic, World and European champions' victory in the women's pair extended their unbeaten run to 33 races. And that's all your sport, Michelle.
All right, thank you very much. And that's it from us. Stay with us on BBC One, though, where it's time for the news wherever you are. Good night.